I never thought I would reach this age and feel like a stranger in my own daughter's life. My name is Margaret. I'm 53 years old, a widow for the past 6 years, and for so long I believed that my only daughter, Emily, was my reason to keep going when grief almost consumed me. I raised her alone after her father died, working 2 jobs, skipping meals, so she could eat pretending to be strong when at night I cried myself to sleep. She was the light I clung to, the anchor I thought would never drift away from me. But as I stood in my quiet kitchen last week, staring at the phone in disbelief, I realized that anchor had been cut loose long ago. It started so casually. I had called Emily expecting to hear her cheerful voice, excited chatter about her upcoming engagement dinner. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, something simple but elegant, wanting to look presentable beside my daughter and her fiancé's family. Instead, when I asked her what time the dinner was, she laughed nervously and said, "Oh, we had it yesterday." Just like that. A blade through the heart slipped in with the softness of a shrug. My chest tightened, my hand trembled holding the phone. I managed a few polite words before she rushed off the line, but inside something had shattered beyond repair. The silence in my house afterward was suffocating. I wandered from room to room, seeing the photos of Emily growing up, her first day of kindergarten, her prom night, her graduation, when I nearly collapsed from pride. All those years, all those sacrifices. And somehow, I had become someone she didn't even want in the room for one of the most important nights of her life. Betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes in a whisper, in an absence, in a dinner you were never invited to. And that kind of betrayal lingers like poison in the veins. I sat at the kitchen table that night staring at the darkened window, and memories flooded me. Memories of her father, my late husband, John. He had been stern but loving, always reminding Emily to respect her mother, to honor the bond of family. He had died when she was only 16, and I remember holding her in my arms as she wept uncontrollably, promising her I would never let her feel alone. But perhaps in protecting her and overgiving, I had lost her respect instead. Perhaps she saw me as weak, as someone to be left behind, while she built her new life with people who seemed more important than me. The next morning I decided to visit her unannounced. I told myself I needed answers, closure, anything to explain the cruel casualness of her words. Emily lived with her fiancé Mark in a sleek apartment downtown, far removed from the modest suburban home where she grew up. When she opened the door and saw me standing there with tired eyes and trembling hands, she froze. For a moment, guilt flickered across her face, but it was quickly replaced by irritation. She didn't invite me in. Instead, she stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her, as if I were some unwelcome guest. "Mom, you shouldn't have come here without calling," she said flatly. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to stay composed. I asked her why she didn't invite me, why she thought it was acceptable to cut me out of her engagement dinner, as though I were a stranger. Her explanation came cold and clinical. It was Mark's family's idea. They thought it would be better if it was just close friends. "They don't really understand you, Mom. You can be overwhelming. Overwhelming." As if my presence was a burden. As if my love had somehow become too much, too embarrassing, too inconvenient. I felt my knees weaken, but I steadied myself against the wall. I wanted to scream, to remind her of the nights I stayed awake sewing her dresses when money was tight, the mornings I walked to work in the freezing cold so she could take the bus to school. But my voice betrayed me. It came out soft, trembling. I told her that all I ever wanted was to see her happy, to stand by her side on this journey. Emily's eyes softened briefly, but then she said something I will never forget. "Mom, you have to understand. This is my life now. Things are different. You can't expect to always be included." The words cut deeper than any knife. I left her building that day with tears burning my eyes. The bustling city around me, a blur of noise and color. I walked for hours past shops, past couples laughing, past families holding hands, feeling like a ghost drifting through a world that had no place for me. By the time I returned home, the sun had set. and I collapsed onto the couch, replaying her words again and again in my head. Overwhelming, not included, different life. The child I had given everything for had placed me outside the boundaries of her future. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. But amid the heartbreak, something inside me stirred, a quiet ember of anger that I hadn't felt in years. Betrayal has a way of burning away illusions, and in its ashes, a new kind of clarity takes root. For years, I had allowed myself to be the quiet giver, the one who asked for nothing, who accepted being overlooked. But not anymore. If Emily and Mark's family thought they could erase me so easily, they were wrong. I was not just some fragile widow to be pushed aside. I had my own strength, my own dignity, and I would remind them of it even if it meant uncovering truths they would rather stay buried. I began to think of the past, of the financial ties that still bound Emily to me, of the secrets I knew about her fiancé's family, things I had overheard in whispers during brief encounters. I realized I held pieces of a puzzle that could change everything if I chose to put them together. And for the first time in years, I felt something other than sorrow. I felt purpose. This betrayal would not be the end of me, it would be the beginning of something else. Something that would make them remember who I was and why I should never have been underestimated. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my tears dried, replaced by a calm determination. I didn't know yet what form my response would take, but I knew one thing for certain: I would not remain silent. I would not fade quietly into the background of my daughter's life. If Emily had chosen to forget who I was, then I would remind her in ways she could never ignore. The days after that painful confrontation blurred together in a haze of silence. I went through the motions of work, cooking, cleaning, paying bills, but everything felt hollow. The betrayal clung to me like a second skin. Yet beneath that grief, a slow burning resolve grew stronger each day. My daughter's words, "You can't expect to always be included," echoed in my head, not as a reminder of rejection, but as a challenge. If she and her fiancé's family thought I was irrelevant, they were mistaken. One evening, I sat at my old oak desk, the same desk where I had balanced every budget during years of widowhood. I pulled out a stack of documents I hadn't touched in months. They were financial papers, investments, and most importantly, the deed to the house Emily had grown up in. A house she had begged me to keep, saying one day she wanted her children to play in the same backyard where she once ran barefoot under the sprinklers. That memory stung now, but it also reminded me that no matter how far she drifted, part of her life was still tied to mine. I began organizing everything almost obsessively. Not because I wanted to control her, but because I needed to remind myself and perhaps her that I was not powerless. I still held pieces of her world, pieces she had taken for granted. And maybe, just maybe, showing her the truth would force her to look at me differently. But it wasn't just about finances. During the engagement dinner debacle, something else had unsettled me. Emily's fiancé Mark came from a wealthy family that prided itself on appearances. I had met his parents only briefly at a charity event months ago, and their smiles had been polished but cold. Behind those smiles, I had overheard whispers, careless conversations about debts, business risks, and scandals they were desperate to keep hidden. At the time, I brushed it aside, thinking it wasn't my place. But now, after being cast out, I couldn't ignore it. If they were so quick to dismiss me, maybe it was because they feared I knew too much. The thought stayed with me for days until curiosity drove me to action. I began discreetly digging into their background, using every connection I had from years of working as a bookkeeper for small businesses. Old colleagues, former clients, acquaintances, they each offered little fragments of information. Slowly, a picture began to form. The seemingly perfect family Mark belonged to was teetering on the edge of financial ruin. Investments gone wrong, lawsuits, quietly settled debts hidden behind layers of shell companies. Their wealth was more fragile than anyone suspected. I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread. Vindication because the very people who had looked down on me were clinging to illusions of grandeur. Dread because my daughter was walking blindly into a marriage with them, trusting that she was joining a secure future, when in truth she was stepping into quicksand. I wanted to warn her to shake her awake, but the memory of her words, "Mom, you can be overwhelming," stopped me. If I confronted her too soon, she would dismiss me again, maybe even cut me off completely. No, I needed to be careful, strategic. So I waited, gathering more proof while rehearsing in my mind the day I would lay it all before her. Every night I would sit by the window looking out at the streetlights, whispering to my late husband, John. I asked him if I was doing the right thing. Was it revenge? Was it protection? Or was it a desperate attempt to claw back the bond I once had with Emily? Sometimes I imagined his steady voice answering, telling me that love doesn't mean silence, that sometimes love must roar like thunder to be heard. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. Emily called one afternoon, her voice tight with worry. She asked if she could come by. I agreed, my heart pounding, 1,000 scenarios running through my mind. When she arrived, her face was pale, her eyes red as though she had been crying. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once helped her with homework, and whispered, "Mom, I don't know what to do." For a moment I wanted to embrace her, to comfort her like I used to, but I held back, letting her speak. She told me Mark's parents had asked her to sign some documents, prenups, financial agreements, things she didn't fully understand. They made it sound normal, but she felt pressured, cornered. "They said it's just a formality," she said, her voice trembling. "But why does it feel like I'm giving something up?" I took a deep breath, then reached for the folder I had prepared. I laid it on the table, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. "Because you are Emily," I said softly, "and you deserve to know the truth before you sign anything." I opened the folder and showed her everything I had gathered, evidence of debts, hidden lawsuits, risky ventures. At first she stared at me in disbelief, shaking her head. "No, this can't be real," she whispered. But as I walked her through each document, each piece of evidence, her face changed. Shock, anger, fear, and finally, betrayal. Not betrayal toward me, but toward the family she was about to marry into. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her voice breaking. I wanted to scream that I had tried, that she had shut me out, that her rejection had silenced me. But instead, I simply said, "Because you weren't ready to listen. And because I was afraid of losing you." She sobbed then, and this time I did hold her. She clung to me like the little girl she once was, the child who used to run into my arms after scraping her knee. For a fleeting moment, I felt that bond again, fragile but alive. And yet I knew this was only the beginning. Mark's family would not take kindly to being exposed. They would fight back, and Emily would be caught in the storm. As I held her, I whispered, "We'll get through this. But you need to be strong, Emily. Stronger than you've ever been. Because the truth always comes with a cost." That night after she left, I sat alone in the quiet once more. The path ahead was dangerous, uncertain. But for the first time since the engagement dinner betrayal, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Hope that maybe my daughter and I could rebuild what was broken. Hope that maybe the truth, no matter how painful, could set us free. Still, a part of me trembled with unease. Because deep down I knew this wasn't just about protecting Emily anymore. This was about reclaiming myself from grief, from silence, from the shadows I had lived in for too long. And I wasn't sure who I would become once that transformation was complete. The days following Emily's tearful visit were unlike anything I had experienced in years. For so long, our relationship had felt like a wall I could not climb, a silence I could not break. But now there was a crack in that wall, and through it, light seeped in. Emily began calling me more often, sometimes just to hear my voice, sometimes to ask questions about the documents I had shown her. It wasn't easy. Her trust was fragile, her emotions volatile, but it was something. And for a mother who had thought she'd lost her daughter forever, that something meant everything. Yet I knew the calm wouldn't last. Mark's family was not ignorant. If Emily had begun questioning them, if she hesitated to sign those papers, they would notice. And when they noticed, they would act. I steeled myself for the inevitable confrontation, but even I wasn't prepared for how quickly it arrived. One Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Mark's mother, Sylvia, standing there in a tailored suit, her smile tight and calculated. Behind her, Mark hovered awkwardly, his eyes darting anywhere but mine. "We need to talk," Sylvia said, her voice crisp, leaving no room for refusal. I invited them in, though my chest tightened with unease. We sat at the dining table, the same place Emily had broken down just days earlier. Sylvia wasted no time. "It has come to our attention," she began, "that you've been feeding Emily dangerous ideas, things that could jeopardize her future and the stability of this engagement." I raised an eyebrow. Dangerous ideas or the truth? Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "The truth is relative, Mrs. Clark. What matters is what's best for Emily. She's young, impressionable. She doesn't need to be burdened with complexities she can't understand." A wave of anger surged through me. How dare she? Emily was not a child. She was 17. Yes, but she was strong, intelligent, and capable of making her own choices. "She has the right to know what she's walking into," I said firmly. "If your family's financial troubles are so inconsequential, then why hide them? Why pressure her to sign away her rights without explanation?" Sylvia's lips thinned. For the first time, the mask cracked, and I saw the simmering desperation beneath her polished exterior. "You don't understand what's at stake," she hissed. "We've built a legacy, a name that carries weight. If rumors spread, if our vulnerabilities are exposed, it won't just ruin us. It will ruin Emily too. She will be dragged down with us." Before I could respond, Mark finally spoke, his voice low and conflicted. "Mom, maybe she's right. Maybe Emily should know everything." Sylvia turned on him with a glare so sharp it silenced him instantly. Then she looked back at me, her voice icy. "If you truly care about your daughter, you'll step aside. Let us handle this. Otherwise, you'll only push her further into chaos." I met her gaze unflinching. "If protecting Emily from being deceived is chaos, then so be it. I will not step aside." The conversation ended there, but the tension lingered long after they left. I knew Sylvia would not back down, and I knew this was no longer just about Emily's marriage. It was about power control and the lengths people would go to preserve illusions. That night, I received a call from Emily. Her voice shook as she told me about the argument she had with Mark. He had confessed that his family was indeed struggling, that the engagement had been pushed forward partly to reassure creditors to maintain appearances. Emily felt betrayed, not just by his lies, but by his silence. "How could he let me walk into this blind?" she sobbed. I had no answer that could soothe her pain. All I could do was remind her that she still had a choice, that her life was her own to shape. But deep inside, I wondered, would she have the courage to walk away? Or would the pressure, the promises, the allure of belonging to a powerful family weigh heavier than truth? The next weeks were a whirlwind. Emily oscillated between resolve and doubt. One day she would call me, determined to end the engagement. The next, she would sound defeated, murmuring about how much she loved Mark, how she wanted to believe he could change. I understood her conflict too well. Love has a way of blinding us, of making us cling to hope, even when the ground beneath us is crumbling. During one of our conversations, I told her something my husband once told me. Love without honesty isn't love at all. It's just a performance, and sooner or later the curtain falls. She was quiet for a long time after that, and though she didn't say it, I could sense the truth sinking in. Then came the rehearsal dinner. Despite everything, Emily decided to attend, if only to face Mark's family one more time before making her final decision. She asked me to come with her. My heart leapt at the invitation. It was the first time she had wanted me by her side in months. I agreed, though I knew it would be a battlefield. When we arrived, the atmosphere was suffocating. Sylvia greeted us with a smile so forced it might as well have been carved in stone. Whispers followed us as we entered the other guests, clearly aware of the tension. Mark stood at the front, his eyes searching for Emily's, but she avoided his gaze. The dinner dragged on, a charade of laughter and toasts, but when it came time for speeches, Emily stood abruptly, her glass trembling in her hand. "I need to say something," she announced, her voice carrying through the room. Silence fell. She looked at Mark, then at his parents, and finally at me. "I love Mark. I thought I knew everything about him, about this family, but I didn't. I was kept in the dark, made to feel like I didn't need to know the truth. And that's not the kind of marriage I want. That's not the kind of life I deserve." Gasps rippled through the room. Mark's face crumpled. Sylvia's mask shattered, and I felt a swell of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. My daughter was choosing honesty over illusion, strength over silence. But even as relief washed over me, I knew this was only the beginning. Breaking an engagement to a powerful family was no small act. There would be consequences, whispers, backlash, maybe even attempts to discredit us. Yet for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Because Emily had found her voice, and I had found mine. As we left the dinner hand in hand, I whispered to her, "This isn't the end, Emily. It's the start of a battle. But you're not alone. I'll be with you every step of the way." And for the first time since that painful night when she excluded me from the engagement dinner, I truly believed it. The fallout from Emily's announcement at the rehearsal dinner spread like wildfire. Within hours, the whispers became phone calls, and by the next morning, the news had traveled through every corner of Mark's family circle. Their perfect facade had cracked in front of dozens of witnesses, and the sting of public humiliation was something Sylvia could not forgive. I woke up to a string of messages, some from friends who had attended the dinner, others from acquaintances who wanted the juicy details. But most of all, I saw the venom in Sylvia's words. "You've destroyed everything. You'll regret this." It was not an idle threat. Within days, rumors about me began to circulate. Old business associates called to ask why they had heard I was financially unstable or living beyond my means. Lies carefully seeded meant to erode my credibility. Sylvia's handprints were all over it. She was lashing out, and I was the target. Emily, meanwhile, was caught in her own storm. Mark showed up at her apartment begging her to reconsider. He swore he hadn't wanted to deceive her, that he had been trying to protect her from unnecessary stress. His tears were real, his voice cracking with desperation. And for a moment I saw my daughter's resolve waver. "Maybe he really does love me, Mom," she whispered over the phone after he left. Maybe he was just scared. I closed my eyes, fighting back the ache in my chest. Emily, love without trust is like a house without a foundation. No matter how pretty it looks, it will collapse in the first storm. She didn't answer, but I knew she was listening. The silence on the other end told me she was weighing every word, every memory, every dream she had tied to Mark. Days turned into weeks, and the tension only grew. Sylvia launched a quiet but relentless campaign against me, questioning my intentions, painting me as a bitter widow clinging to control. Invitations I once received stopped arriving. Neighbors became distant. I could feel the walls of isolation closing in, but I refused to break. Each night I sat with my journals, writing down everything, every threat, every rumor, every attempt to silence me. If Sylvia thought she could destroy me with whispers, she underestimated the power of truth. And then the shocking twist came. A former associate of Mark's father reached out to me, anonymously slipping an envelope under my door. Inside were documents, bank statements, court filings, correspondence that painted a damning picture of the family's financial empire. Fraud, embezzlement, bribery. Not just whispers, but hard evidence. My hands trembled as I read, not from fear but from the weight of what I now held. This was more than just a family dispute. This was criminal. I debated what to do. Handing it over to the authorities would expose the family and likely collapse everything they had built. But it would also drag Emily into the firestorm, her name linked forever to scandal. Keeping it hidden, however, meant allowing them to continue manipulating, deceiving, destroying lives in the pursuit of their vanity. When Emily came over that weekend, I showed her the documents. Her face went pale, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This is worse than I imagined." I reached for her hand. "You have a choice, Emily. You can walk away quietly and let them bury this, or you can stand up, knowing the storm it will bring." She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and determination all at once. "What would you do, Mom?" I swallowed hard. I would protect the truth. Because lies are like chains, they bind you tighter the longer you ignore them. But the truth can set you free even if it burns everything else to the ground. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "Then I won't be silent." The days that followed were a blur of decisions, lawyers, and preparation. Emily ended her engagement, officially returning the ring with steady hands. Sylvia's fury was explosive. She called me, her voice dripping with venom. "You've ruined us. You've ruined her future. Do you think anyone respectable will want her now?" I let her words hang in the air before answering softly. "Better to have no husband than to marry into a lie." The silence that followed was deafening, then she hung up. But the true battle was yet to come. Word of the documents began to leak, and suddenly reporters were calling, sniffing around for confirmation. Emily was terrified, and I couldn't blame her. The weight of being associated with scandal was crushing. But I reminded her daily, "This is not your shame, Emily. This is theirs. You are not responsible for the sins of those who tried to deceive you." Despite everything, I felt something inside me shift. For years, I had lived in the shadow of loss, losing John, losing the closeness of my daughter, losing my place in a family that seemed to move forward without me. But now, standing at Emily's side, I realized I had not lost myself. In fact, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. The climax came during a family gathering. Sylvia had arranged a desperate attempt to control the narrative. She invited relatives, friends, even community leaders, hoping to shame us into submission. But Emily and I attended together, walking into the grand dining hall with our heads held high. Sylvia stood at the head of the table, her smile brittle, her voice laced with venom, as she spun her tale of betrayal and outside interference. She painted me as a manipulative mother desperate to cling to relevance. The guests nodded politely, their eyes flicking toward me with suspicion. When she finished, Emily rose to her feet. Her voice trembled at first, but then it grew steady, clear, undeniable. "This isn't about my mother. This is about me. I was lied to, deceived, pressured into silence, and I won't be silent anymore." Gasps filled the room. Sylvia's face turned crimson. I stood beside my daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder, adding my voice to hers. "The truth always comes out, whether whispered in shadows or shouted in daylight. And the truth is this: you tried to bury your shame in my daughter's future. But we will not carry your sins." The room erupted in murmurs, some supportive, others scandalized. Sylvia's mask shattered completely, and for the first time I saw not power but desperation in her eyes. She had lost control. That night, as Emily and I walked out together, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. We had faced betrayal, secrets, and lies. And though the storm still raged around us, we were no longer standing alone. The days after the family gathering were a whirlwind. News of what had unfolded spread quickly, not just through whispers, but through tangible consequences. Some relatives who had once worshipped Sylvia's family began to distance themselves, wary of being tainted by the scandal. Others, more sympathetic, quietly reached out to me and Emily with words of encouragement. It was a strange, disorienting mix: shame for being the center of gossip, pride for standing firm in the truth. Emily was shaken, but she carried herself with a maturity I hadn't seen in her before. Each morning I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, her shoulders squared, her eyes clear. She told me she finally understood the weight of my words, the cost of silence. "I don't want to build my life on someone else's lies." "Mom," she said one morning, her voice calm but steady. Hearing her speak that way filled me with both relief and sorrow. Relief because she had chosen herself, her dignity, her freedom. Sorrow because she had learned the lesson in such a painful way. No mother ever wants her child to face betrayal, but sometimes the hardest truths carve the deepest strength. Of course, Sylvia didn't give up easily. There were more attempts, threatening letters from lawyers, rumors meant to paint Emily as unstable, even veiled suggestions that she was ungrateful for walking away from such a prestigious marriage. But something had shifted inside my daughter. Instead of breaking down, she stood taller. She forwarded the letters to her own lawyer. She laughed at the gossip. She reminded herself that she had nothing to be ashamed of. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset from our back porch, Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "I thought you were trying to control me, Mom," she admitted softly. "But really, you were just trying to protect me. I see that now." Tears burned my eyes, but I held them back. I simply kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I'll always protect you, Emily, even when you think you don't need it." The weeks turned into months, and slowly life found a new rhythm. Emily returned to her studies, threw herself into her passions, surrounded herself with friends who truly cared for her. The shadow of Sylvia's family still lingered, but it no longer defined her. She was free, bruised perhaps, but free. As for me, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. There were nights when I sat awake asking myself if I had done the right thing, if perhaps I had been too harsh, too relentless, too unwilling to let Emily make her own mistakes. But then I remembered the look in her eyes the night she walked out of that dinner hand in hand with me, clear, steady, unafraid. That look told me I had given her something worth more than wealth or status. I had given her the truth. And the truth, I realized, is the greatest inheritance a mother can give. Still, I couldn't ignore my own transformation. For years, I had lived in shadows, widowed, forgotten, cast aside at family gatherings, treated as though my voice no longer mattered. I had almost believed it myself. But this battle had reignited something in me. I was no longer just Emily's mother, the quiet widow who kept her head down. I was a woman who had faced lies and refused to bow. A woman who had rediscovered her own strength. The final piece of closure came one evening when Mark himself showed up at my door. He looked different, tired, disheveled, the weight of his family's crumbling empire etched into his face. He didn't ask to come in. He simply stood on the porch and said, "I'm sorry. I should have been honest. I did love her, but I didn't know how to stand against my family." For a long moment, I studied him. He was a boy caught in the web of people stronger and crueler than him, and in another life, maybe he could have been different. But choices matter. And his choices had cost him my daughter. "All Emily wanted was honesty," I said quietly. "But you couldn't give her that. Now you'll have to live with what you lost." He nodded, his eyes glassy, and then he walked away. I never saw him again. When I closed the door, I felt no anger, no gloating, just a quiet, bittersweet peace. The storm had passed. Months later, Emily and I found ourselves at another wedding, this time the wedding of one of her closest friends. As I watched her laugh, dance, and celebrate without the weight of lies pressing down on her, I realized we had come full circle. The night she excluded me from her engagement dinner had nearly broken me. But standing there watching her shine, I knew we had survived something greater. Family betrayal cuts the deepest, but sometimes it also forges the strongest bonds. Emily and I had walked through fire together, and though we carried scars, we also carried strength. And so, to anyone listening to my story, I want to leave you with this: silence does not protect you. Pretending not to see the cracks doesn't keep the house standing, it just makes the collapse more sudden. Speak the truth, even if your voice trembles. Protect the ones you love, even when they don't understand. Because in the end, love without honesty is not love at all. So if you've ever felt silenced, betrayed, or cast aside, know this: you are not powerless. You have a voice, you have strength, and the truth, no matter how painful, can set you free. Thank you for walking with me through my story. If it touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, I ask you to please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your voice matters too, and I'd love to hear it.